Welcome back to the preview show. Of course, Norwich City been without any action in the past couple of weeks. It feels like a lifetime ago since that Coventry away game a couple of weeks back now. We're looking forward to Norwich returning on Saturday, of course, against Daniel Farke's Leeds United. And joining me to discuss that is my colleague Samuel Seaman on our preview show this afternoon. Sam, first and foremost, very rainy outside. It's very miserable, but, football is back tomorrow at Carrow Road. So it feels like the mood is still... It's a little bit negative, isn't it, at the moment around the fan base? They probably need a good performance and a good result tomorrow to get things back on track. But how have you found the international break and how are you feeling about tomorrow's big game?
Yeah, I haven't really enjoyed it that much. I think because I was away for the Coventry game beforehand. It feels like such a long time since I actually went to and covered a football game. I think normally it comes at a time where I'm quite open to it and quite happy to lose maybe the cycle of the Championship and just have a couple of weeks off. But I think because I missed that Coventry game, really feels like it's dragged. But you mentioned that fan mood, and I think although the momentum is quite negative in terms of results at the moment, I think that break did come at the right time in terms of everyone will be excited now to go back to Carrow Road and to watch Norwich City play again. I think because of that break, there probably will be a more positive atmosphere than had this game come, a few days after the fairly disappointing end to that Coventry game. So I think that's come at the right time for Norwich. It's definitely come at the right time for me in terms of missing watching football games. But it was a bit of a strange one in terms of how long it's felt. How was the international break for you? Did you get up to anything particularly exciting?
No, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual kind of waiting for Norwich to return, kind of plodding along, trying to make the most of the break. It's quite nice. You kind of get that time to catch up with family and friends, maybe when you don't really get that during a season, when it's kind of relentless game after game. Kind of told them all to not see me this week with the 3-game week now coming. So, the swings and roundabouts of what we do. But just going back to it, 2 wins at home during the break between September and October. Home form's actually been pretty good, just 1 defeat at Carrow Road all season. That was against Leicester, which ironically I thought they were very good in the second half of that game and probably deserved something from. There's a few mitigating factors for the away form, given the Sargent and Barnes injuries that we obviously having to endure in recent games. I mean, what are your reflections on kind of the first 11 games of the season, Sam? Because it started really well. It's kind of gone on a bit of a downward trajectory in recent games. David Wagner felt this morning that the performances haven't been miles off. There's maybe just a few tweaks to make. How big maybe are the next 5 games that are now coming up?
I think they're very big, but they're also quite difficult. Looking at that fixture list, they've got a few, really big and really hard games on the horizon. I think the trip to Sunderland will be quite a difficult one. Obviously, Leeds are absolutely flying at the moment, so they are definitely big for Norwich. And now I think they've got some players coming back from injury. Wagner spoke this morning about how Borja is in contention to feature against Leeds, and obviously Grant Hanley looks like he's going to be back maybe earlier than expected. Marcelino Nunez back in the fold as well, and Jakob Sorensen with a few weeks training should be available again. So although it's not the players in Josh Sargent and Ashley Barnes who clearly Norwich have missed and who inspired the good results at the start of the season, there should be reasons now to believe that Wagner will be able to turn it round, and he does have a few more players in the mix and a few more options to use now in these games. Of course, without being at their best, it feels like it's more of a time to survive than a time to really thrive in a Norwich shirt. I think they have to wait until Barnes and Sargent are back to really see the same sort of performances and the same sort of tactical coherence that earned them so many points early on in the season. So it feels to me, and I think this has been the common consensus among the fan base since those results started to tail off really, and since Josh Sargent's injury at Huddersfield, is that they just have to hang on and sort of stay in the top half mix within reach of the playoffs until they can get Sargent back and they can get back on top form, and then it will just be a case for me of really pushing for the playoffs. It's a shame because the way they started the season, it looked like they could go on and shock a lot of people and maybe even challenge for the automatics. They certainly looked like a team that was good enough to be in the playoffs come the end of the season, but due to something that's out of their own hands really, and not something that they could have prepared for, especially given the financial limitations on them this summer, they're now back to where expectation sort of was just because of that injury. But that's not to say that they're a playoff level team without Sargent and they're an automatic level team with him. It feels to me that maybe the average is going to average itself out as a team that's in and around the playoffs. I think with Sargent, they're probably a top 4 or 5 team when they're at their best. But at the moment, I think they're more mid-table, upper end of the bottom half without those teams. So it's about whether they can struggle through the next few weeks and the next couple of months until those players come back. And they have got some tough fixtures. So I think there may need to be a little bit of maybe not pessimism, but sort of some acceptance that they won't be able to get 3 points in all those games. They might have to go into some of these games in this run targeting a point and admitting that they would be happy with that. And then when it comes back to that sort of situation where they've got their full complement available, then they can go really for the jugular and try and get back into that mix. But yeah, for now, it just feels like a bit of a holding pattern. And as much as we talk about solutions and finding ways to replace Barnes and Sargent, I think they've had long enough now that if that was going to happen in a big way, they would have found a way to do it. So it's just about muddling through for me. And as sad as that is, that's just what you've got to do at times. And I think that's what Norwich will have to do in this difficult run of games.
Yeah, a few reasons to be positive on this miserable afternoon. Jeffman saying it's perfect Johnny Rowe knee sliding weather. I think the one against Hull was in sort of, the midst of a sunny afternoon, and that was a pretty good knee slide. So I'm looking forward to seeing that if he gets on the score sheet tomorrow in wet conditions. You mentioned there about the injury situation, Joe, saying it's nice to see Grant Hanley back. When's he due to come back in the squad? Well, David Wagner said he's in team training now. It's going to be one of them where they're going to have to keep building him up, get minutes in the under-23s, and they're not going to throw him straight in. He's come off a 6-month injury now, and it's one of them where you need to sort of, well, I suppose, bed him back in very slowly so you don't cause any further issues. A few other positives, as you mentioned, Borja Sainz returning, Jakob Sorensen needs time to train after a long-term absence, but one that I think we can expect back in the coming weeks. Nunez, of course, got minutes with Chile, which was... He scored a goal. Well, he sort of scored a goal. He was in the midst of the goal that they scored in a 2-0 victory, then got himself sent off during the week after coming off the bench, so not ideal. Ashley Barnes, fairly positive on him, potentially could be back for the Cardiff game just before the November international break, which is positive as well. Josh Sargent is more sort of the Christmas time. Nothing's really changed on that one. Just sort of on that, Sam, we've now got a few more options there for David Wagner. You spoke a little bit about it on your tactics board and the way you see him approaching this one in terms of a team, but he's now got more players to play with. He changed personnel at Coventry. How do you see him sort of setting up tomorrow? Is it a case of sort of maybe the players that haven't performed in recent weeks coming out, and then replacing them with the players that are now back available, or do you just stick with the same 11 and sort of back them in terms of sort of their confidence, I suppose?
I'd be surprised if it's the same 11 that we saw sort of the other side of the international break. I don't think Pohet has really taken his chance since earning it in those cup games and substitute appearances. But the way that he spoke about science in that press conference has changed my thinking a little bit. I spoke a lot about in tactics board about how pressing Farke's teams is so important and being able to do it well, because if you do it poorly, it plays right into his hands and their hands. But if you can do it well, we've seen before in his time at Norwich that if you can suffocate those players that like a bit of time to pass the ball out, then you can really cause them problems. And not only try and win the ball back in an attacking sense, but you can really strangle them creatively and stop them getting forward. But because that's such an important area, I wonder if he will be tempted to throw science into the mix, because Adam Ida's strength is not pressing whatsoever. I think he's quite intelligent with how he does it, and tactically he seems to understand it, but I'm just not sure he has the legs to really do it. He's obviously got quite an athletic profile, he's quite a big lad, but his acceleration isn't really there for me. And it's obviously with pressing, when they're moving the ball around between defenders, it's about short, sharp bursts to try and put the pressure on and stop them advancing the play, and Ida isn't really that good at that. That's not one of his strengths, and that's one of the main reasons why going from Sargent to him has been quite a significant drop-off. But science, we've seen, that is one of his strengths. That was how that goal against Fulham on his debut, of course, came about. Looking at clips of his goals for Giresunspor, that was quite a common way of finding opportunities for him to go and score from. I think pressing is probably one of the main reasons why they brought him in this summer. So against a Farke side, tactically it makes a lot of sense to throw him in there. But of course, he's only got a handful of minutes at senior level, not only since joining Norwich, but in English football. It's still something that he's undoubtedly got to adapt to. And Wagner hasn't really looked like somebody who likes throwing someone in. You take Adam Forshaw, for example, as somebody who he praised so much immediately as soon as he came in, but it still took several weeks for him to really be in that first team mix. So Science was the one that sort of stood out to me, but I'm not sure a lot of the performances in the team in the last few weeks have really earned starts. I think Fastnacht is somebody who I'd not be surprised at all to see come back in. He had a few poor weeks, but he's somebody who Wagner trusts very well. And I think a lot of people have forgotten how well he actually started the season. He was one of Norwich's best players as they were producing such excellent form. So I think with a little bit of a break, having been thrown into a really hectic championship schedule without having played in England before, I think a break would have done him good, and Wagner might be keen to get him back into the team. So I wouldn't be surprised to see changes, but we know that Wagner is quite a stubborn man, so I'm not expecting to see 6 or 7. But yeah, he's not somebody that goes and makes loads of changes. So probably not loads, but I don't think anyone could say, based on those Coventry and Swansea performances, that anybody's got a nailed down spot really at the moment.
Yeah, Leeds to visitors tomorrow, which is one that always whets the appetite, but there's the kind of different dynamic about it tomorrow. Daniel Farke returning to Carrow Road for the first time. Of course, went off to Russia, then had spells at Mönchengladbach, and now back in England. Managing Leeds United, 208 games in charge of the Canaries. An interesting press conference of his yesterday. Lots of kind of glowing, I suppose, sort of talking about his time at Norwich City and how much he looks back on that with pride, kind of the 2 promotions, the 2 title wins with 97 and 94 points. And but he's also sort of one of them where he's quick to kind of deflect that element from the game. He's a Leeds United manager now. He needs to get 3 points on Saturday for their sort of, I suppose, title and definitely promotion credentials this season. Going to just play a clip for David Wagner speaking this morning about Daniel Farke, and then we'll get into that one.
Just a few more from me, but obviously tomorrow's game against Leeds, and we'll speak about Leeds in a moment, but got to ask you about Daniel Farke, clearly coming back to Carrow Road for the first time. I don't think it's a manager that you've faced in your career, but clearly someone who has an incredible history at the club, 2 titles, lots of had a great relationship with supporters. Just kind of a word for him, because I'm sure you've inherited kind of a lot of the good work and the foundations that he put in place at this football club over his time here.
Yeah, obviously he had a good time here. I haven't met him often. We met us only once when in a friendly when we played with Schalke against Norwich. This was the only time I met him. He followed me when I left Dortmund's second team. I think it was him. I'm not quite sure. I know more his assistant, Christo Mogala, so he was in my backroom staff as a head of performance when I was in Dortmund's second team. So I worked with him for, I think, for sure 1 year, maybe 2 years. I know him better. And obviously, they come back. I know how it feels to come back. I experienced it twice with Huddersfield, but at the end of the day, now he is a Leeds United manager, and obviously we face Leeds United, and our aim, especially here at home, to show and to come back to our best.
Yeah, we all know about Daniel Farke. What sort of reception do you think he's going to get tomorrow, Sam? I mean, what he's done here probably puts him in sort of the top manager brackets of Norwich City history for what he achieved on the pitch, and sort of the unity he brought to the city and his connection with the fans. We all know how strong that was. I was sort of a fan at that point, and the enjoyment and the great times he brought for me personally is up there with some of the best. So how do you think the fan base is going to react to him tomorrow, Sam? And will it be sort of before the game, after the game? How do you feel it's going to go?
Well, this is the interesting element for me, really, is when it happens and in what sort of format. There's no doubt it's obviously going to be a positive one. I don't see any booing or anything like that. And I think most people, looking back, recognise the unbelievable achievements that he reached with this Norwich City team. As you said, I think we were both fans at the time, and watching that team was the highlight of my week at times, knowing the entertainment that we would get from watching that Norwich team. And obviously he brought 2 championship title wins, which, given the size of club that Norwich are and the fairly modest trophy cabinet they currently have, winning 2 championship titles as a manager of this club is a fantastic achievement. So I think there's no doubt fans will look at him positively, but it's just about when that comes. I think there's already been quite a significant debate on social media. There was one tweet I think he put out on our social channels that sort of got the debate going, and a lot of people would rather he was only really given that treatment post-match, but then that doesn't really guarantee that it happens, because if they lose, if Norwich are 4-0 down after 60 minutes, and let's hope they're not, but if Norwich are 4-0 down after 60 minutes, how many fans, number one, are going to be left in Carrow Road at the full-time whistle, and number two, are going to want to stand there and applaud the head coach that's been behind that? So I would say if fans are really keen to ensure that they recognise what Farke gave them, they'll try and do it pre-match. But then I also understand the argument that he's an opposition manager. You don't want to give him any praise or any motivation, or maybe affect your own players negatively before the game. So there are sort of two sides to it. I think it will be mixed in terms of the timing and in terms of what it looks like, but there's no doubt overwhelmingly it will be positive. And I'm actually quite intrigued to see what it looks like and what that relationship looks like, because we haven't seen a manager return to Carrow Road that's had such an affinity with supporters maybe ever. I think even going back to Paul Lambert, who was arguably the most successful manager before Daniel Farke. He came back on the back of leaving the club for Aston Villa and quite a messy divorce from the club. So it's been a long, long time since we've seen somebody so adored by the fans come back to Carrow Road, and it will definitely be an interesting element of how it plays out. And on the pitch, it's going to be very strange and interesting to watch a team play against Farke ball on that Carrow Road pitch. So that'll be definitely an interesting element. I'm sure people have noticed that almost all the discussion around the match has centred around Farke so far. And yeah, I'm mainly intrigued to see what the reception is like, because I don't really know what it's going to be honest.
Yeah, just talking about Leeds and their performances so far this season. They started off quite slowly. It's often difficult coming down from the Premier League. You've kind of got that overhang of a squad. Some players don't want to be here, and they're looking for transfer moves with the window still open. And I think Daniel Farke had to deal with that. There's plenty of players that were sort of frozen out of the squad, almost what he had at Norwich at different points with, Buendia, Cantwell, we could go on. Since then, they've kind of picked up a little bit. 3 wins in the last 4. It feels like they kind of now hit the stride that you need maybe to kind of push on in the Championship. I mean, I looked at the likes of Nottingham Forest and Luton. They kind of often had poor starts, and then they had a really good run kind of after the first sort of quarter of the season. And that's often where you need to hit the stride at the right time. Yeah, just on them more generally, Sam, what have you made of it so far this season? Have you seen much of them? Lots of sort of good attacking players, the likes of Somerville and Pirot, Ruter, I think, has been playing really well for Leeds. So what have you made of it from afar?
Yeah, it was one where I think I maybe wrote them off a little bit too early, because you see the results that they had early on, and you look at the names that they've lost from the squad this summer, and it did feel like it was going to be an uphill struggle for Farke, because they seemed to sort of start their pre-season really, really late. It felt like a club that was almost forgetting they had a championship game in a few weeks by the time Farke got his players in and got the pre-season going. And I did think it was going to be a difficult one for Farke. But just looking at their results in recent times, you said obviously 3 wins out of the last 4. I think they've only lost 1 of their last 9 league games as well. And just looking at the team sort of to prepare for Tactics Board and for the various pieces I've done on this so far, it's just an unbelievable team. Look, from the back all the way up to the front, it's Premier League names. And then Farke, listening to his press conference, was reeling off names that were injured. And it's, even the players that aren't involved during this fantastic run. They've got Firpo back in training, Jed Spence, who's obviously a very key player for Forest as they were promoted. And really, you can understand why the expectation is so high on them in this division. I think with that squad of players, Farke has to get them promoted, or he'll be out of the door really. Albeit he's got quite a complicated style, and he'll want to embed that in his players. They seem to have taken it on really, really quickly. And that team, that squad, simply is too good for this division, really, if you look at it. So they're definitely up there with Southampton and Leicester in terms of favourites and in terms of quality. And they've got the momentum coming into this one as well. So there's not much actually going against them. Perhaps Norwich will hope the break took the sting out of Leeds' tail a little bit. But I have to say, I think escaping from this game with a point would be an absolutely massive result for Norwich. So they've definitely got a lot to keep an eye on. Joel Pirot is somebody who's really shined for them at the moment. And then you look at somebody like Patrick Bamford, proven Premier League, Championship, international goalscorer, currently on the bench for them. And that tells you everything really about how much quality they've got running all the way through that squad. So it'll definitely be an incredibly difficult task for Norwich, I think. And it looks like they're only getting better. You mentioned that sort of form and how they started slowly. Of course, two key promotions that involved that pattern were Norwich. In that 2018-19 season, I think they started, probably the difference between the two title wins was expectation. And in that first one, I think everyone expected them to finish playing how they started the season. They started so poorly, and then ironically after that Leeds result, that was where they really seemed to kick on. Same again in 2020, when there was, similarly to Leeds actually, a little bit of flux in their squad. Cantwell and Buendia wanted to leave the club. Ben Godfrey was in the process of leaving. Jamal Lewis had left in the summer, and there were quite a few players arriving at the club as well that needed to adapt to life in England and in the Championship. So Norwich know what it's like to be in that period of flux, but Farke has proved before that he has been able to construct a team that gets through that period, that grinds out results, and that finds a way to get back to their best. And I think that's what they seem to have done in the last few weeks. So a very, very good Leeds side arrives at Carrow Road, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, and most Norwich fans would agree with me, that a point would be a massive result, to be honest.
Yeah, any glimmer of hope is that Leeds struggle slightly more on the road. 2 defeats theirs, both on the road this season at Birmingham and Southampton. They also drew at Hull. So maybe with Norwich's home form, they can kind of take advantage of that. There's some players in the Norwich squad that will know Daniel Farke and the way he sets up and his sort of style of play. So maybe the way to counter that and get the best performance, best result that they can possibly try and get. And as you say, I think a point most fans would probably take. We'll dip into the comments now. Tom Carlson on Facebook. Hi, Tom. Hope you're well this afternoon. Could you see it turning toxic if we put in a poor performance tomorrow? I mean, obviously you weren't at the Coventry game, Sam, but there was sort of a few fractures amongst fans in the away end. You could see Angus Gunn quite visually kind of, sort of trying to speak to the fans, but not directly, but kind of, from a further distance away. And he maybe looked a little bit shocked at what was going on. So given kind of the circumstances around it and sort of the fact they are on this poor run of form, could you see it turning toxic tomorrow? I think for me personally, the way that I view it is that Norwich are kind of in a bit of a difficult state at the moment, where you've got this new sporting director coming in. You've got sort of the Atanasios now sort of going to have more of an involvement moving forward. You've got David Wagner, who's obviously been brought here by Stuart Webber and probably isn't 100% certain around his future with the new sporting director coming in. It all just feels kind of a little bit of they're kind of muddling along, I suppose, until all these new things that are in place.
No, that's true. I think in the short term and the mid term, they are sort of muddling along, obviously because of the Sergeant Barnes element that I referenced earlier, and as you say, all those things on the horizon as well. But what makes it less likely to get toxic because of that is the fact that there's sort of hope. Whereas at times last season it felt like, and I think fans always know that they have a role to play when they want a manager gone, and it felt like Norwich fans were trying to will Dean Smith's sacking into action later on in the season. There was a lot of criticism for Stuart Webber, making their feelings known on him. But now that both of those things have happened, there's not really much to rail against. It's almost like you could be negative, but what are they going to chant? They're going to chant Webber out. It doesn't seem like they've got many options, and hopefully there will be some positivity from those fans who are feeling negative about Norwich at the moment. I'm not criticising those fans. I think based on the trajectory, not necessarily the league position at the moment, but the trajectory, sorry, it's an easy word to say, in terms of how the results are sliding down, I absolutely understand the negativity. But rather than worrying about where the club's going, they know that change is going to happen. And if they want Wagner gone, as you say, he's got a new sporting director coming in to assess him. So there is definitely an increased possibility that happens. I think the hope is probably something that makes it less likely to turn toxic, although as you say, there were those scenes at Coventry, so it's obviously not impossible. I did find that a little bit bewildering, and it was quite an interesting story, really, after what was quite a good performance. Having watched it back, they were maybe too negative, and tactically I'm not sure it was spot on, but I thought individually a lot of the players played quite well, even though there was that obviously shocking and negative moment at the end that cost them 2 points. So it definitely does have the ability to turn somewhat toxic. The Farke element obviously adds to that, and I think a lot of people have already sort of discussed the possibility that you've got a manager there who's won 2 championship titles for the club and was loved, defeating the current Norwich regime, and what message does that send? So I think it probably could, but as I say, there's not as much to rail against, and there's not as much change to protest for, because that change has already happened and is already in the process of happening. So yeah, I think it is a possibility, but maybe a more slim one than had these results been happening at the same time last season.
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment. Jeffman on YouTube, feel like it'll end up like the Leicester game, where the lack of squad depth off the bench will be our downfall. Yeah, I think probably the only upside is that, we speak about kind of the signs and the Nunez as being back available, sort of more creative players than maybe what he had to sort of use it, I suppose, in those games against the likes of Leicester and less so Plymouth, because they were already 4-0 down. But options that maybe could come on and change the game. It kind of felt like he had Liam Gibbs, who's more of a maybe not necessarily an attacking player. I know he's played in the number 10, but I wouldn't put him as an out-and-out attacker. So it's kind of difficult for Wagner trying to manage that. A few more comments and questions here. Looks like we've got some Ipswich Town watchers. 3-0 leads from Ben there, Jeffman. Hoping that Hugo will score a hat-trick against him tonight. Ipswich, that is. Of course, they play Rotherham. I imagine what's going to be a lovely conditions for Rotherham and their side tonight. They're going to relish playing in this weather. Sam, moving the attention now to the game. How are you feeling? I mean, we've spoken about it now. Daniel Farke element. You've kind of got the Norwich needing to try and bounce back and get a good result at home, keep up the home form that David Wagner spoke about this morning in his press conference. So, thoughts and a score prediction.
I've been criticised for being too negative, but you look at that. I've spent a lot of time looking at that Leeds squad, and it's impossible to look at that and really back Norwich. To be honest, it's not a criticism of where they are. I think even the way that they played, peak Norwich this season, when they were winning several games in a row and they looked absolutely on it, I think even they would have been going into this game as underdogs, because that Leeds team is absolutely packed with quality, and I think Norwich would be absolutely chuffed with a draw from it, to be honest. I think they're going to be really up against it, but I don't see them collapsing like they did in the Plymouth game. I think with the home support and with the sort of tension that there is around the game, especially with that Farke element, I think there will be enough motivation and enough tension in the game that it won't turn into a silly sort of scoreline. But yeah, Leeds are just the better side, and Norwich will be hoping they have a day off. So unless Wagner can pull off an absolute tactical masterclass, I think he could even be at 9 out of 10 tactically, and they could still lose this game. So I would say 2-0 to Leeds. Hopefully they can produce more than that, but I think it would be definitely heart over head if I went for anything other than a Leeds win at the moment. But are you feeling any more positive?
Yeah. I was looking back at kind of the recent sort of games between the two sides. The last 0-0 was 1992, so there's always goals in this game. So in my head, it's one of them where I think Norwich are going to have to be defensively on it. They actually were pretty good defensively at Coventry, ironically, and it was just kind of one of those mistakes that have often crept into their game under sort of David Wagner more generally, that cost them 3 points, albeit the performance level that day wasn't probably as good as what it's been at different points in games where they've lost. So it's going to be an interesting one. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, which is quite optimistic, I suppose, given that some people are Jeffman there saying bound to be a 0-0. Then it probably is written in the stars now that stat's been bandied around. But fingers crossed we get a good game between the two sides. Lots of stuff as well off the pitch. I think Westy is the community hero tomorrow, which anyone who's obviously associated with our channels will know that he had an interview with you yourself before he was at the Millwall game, I think. Since then, he's ran his marathon, raised £60,000. He was a VIP at the England game at the weekend. So if you're heading down to Carrow Road a little bit earlier tomorrow, then that'd be great if you could, show him some support when he brings out the ball. There's also, I think it's Jordan Murrell, who sadly passed away at the age of 29. There's going to be a sort of a clap, I think, for him tomorrow on the 29th minute. So if you're a Norwich fan or a Leeds fan, hopefully you can get involved in that and show some support to, a really big Norwich City fan and his family during a difficult time for them. Lots of other great content across our channels at the moment as well. Of course, David Wagner's press conference was this morning. Just put that up on the YouTube channel in full, so you can go and hear his thoughts on this one, the team news, kind of the Daniel Farke aspect, his thoughts on Leeds, everything you need to know that he's thinking ahead of this one. Tactics board is up that Sam done, so if you want to hear Sam's thoughts in terms of a team selection and sort of tactical preview on the game, then that's there. I spoke to a Leeds fan as well during the week. Barney, great bloke, lots of great insight there on Leeds and how Daniel Farke's getting on. Also Connor as well, done a really nice piece sort of with some of the legends of that game against Bayern Munich. You can go and hear a full audio podcast actually with 5 of the big stars of that team. That's now on our audio platforms and on YouTube. Of course, we've got the Pink and Plus app as well, which is $1.99 for the first 2 months, $2.99 thereafter, or $29.99 for an annual subscription. Lots of great content on there. Of course, Connor will be live blogging tomorrow afternoon, so if you're not at Carrow Road, you can keep up with it that way. With that, we're going to sign off on this Friday afternoon. Jeffman saying, have a top afternoon, gents. Lots of great stuff to finish off before we can sign off on this Friday and get our teeth into tomorrow's game. We'll be at Carrow Road, Team News Live at 2 p.m. So you can catch the team and what David Wagner goes for there, and all the fallout from the game. Daniel Farke's thoughts and David Wagner's thoughts will be on our YouTube channel. So with that, we're going to sign off. Enjoy your weekend, whatever you're getting up to, and hopefully the weather improves by the time we all walk down to Carrow Road tomorrow afternoon.